Hi, this is Book with Emma. I'm Emma, and today we're talking about a book that I've been afraid to read, and it's this one, Starlight by Stella Gibbons. The reason I've been afraid to read it for a long time is not because it's about demonic possession, although it is. It's because it's by Stella Gibbons, who is the author of Cold Comfort Farm. And Cold Comfort Farm is, I would say, my favourite book I've ever read. It's really funny, really clever. It's just so joyful, and I read it quite regularly. And Stella Gibbons is kind of known as a one-hit wonder with Cold Comfort Farm. She wrote quite a few other books, but I haven't wanted to read them just because I didn't want to spoil Cold Comfort Farm. But I decided to bite the bullet and read Starlight. So this book, Starlight, was published in 1967. And it's about two sisters who are in their 70s, Gladys and Annie, and they live in Highgate in London in a cottage. It's not really a cottage, makes it sound nicer than it is. It's a shared building, and they have two rooms. So they have a bedroom with a sink and then a kitchen living room, and they share a toilet, but there's no bath. And there's an older man in his late 80s, I think, who lives in the attic above their room. The other side of the house is kind of a bigger apartment. So it's a shared entrance and then it's different areas in the house. One day, the neighbour who lives there comes and tells them that the landlady has sold the whole house and other properties that she owns to a rack man. And everyone gets very scared. I had never heard the term Ratman, so if you haven't, I looked it up. So there was a man called Peter Ratman, and he was a landlord. He bought up loads of property in London in the 50s, and then he would extort the tenants, basically. Particularly, he would advertise kind of and promote himself to people arriving from the West Indies as someone who could get accommodation for them, but actually he was ripping them off. And he was also involved in crime. He was involved with the Craze and also the property that was involved in the perfume over. And he also was having an affair with both of those women too, Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davies. So he exploited his tenants basically and would intimidate them, threaten them, put rents up, and then just threatened to throw people out if they didn't pay, and just didn't really care about laws and things. And he was so notorious that this term, Ratmanism, then went into the dictionary. So when the sisters and the man who lives above them hear that the place is being bought by a Ratman, they're very, very concerned about rents being put up because they can't afford it. They're also concerned about being thrown out so that they can be replaced with someone who pays more. Kind of similar to now in a way. But the Ratman doesn't throw them out. He doesn't put up the rent. He does come around ordering them about and kind of threatening them. If they don't do what he says, he will throw them out, put the rent up. But he lets them stay, and his wife moves into the part of the cottage where the family was. They're still married and they visit each other, so it's not fully explained why the wife needs to be elsewhere, probably just because he runs his criminal enterprise from where he lives. So maybe he just wants to keep his wife out of the criminal side of things, and he puts her in this cottage, and she has an unspecified illness. She's mostly bedridden and very kind of languid and very kind though. So she is very friendly to the sisters and the old man. She invites them for Christmas dinner and things, and she redecorates, and she seems very nice. But she has a weird aversion to church bells and anything religious. And when she comes across anything religious, she starts talking in a different voice. And immediately, basically, the sisters and the old man think, oh, this is a case of demonic possession. And they go to the vicar, a Church of England vicar, and a curate who's there, and they tell them. And they also agree, like it's a clear-cut demonic possession. No one really disagrees. The vicar does say it could be a mental illness or it could be a demonic possession, but the treatment for both is prayer. Get a few people to pray for her and visit her regularly and have tea and just chat. For me, the demonic possession part was surprising, mostly because it was so undramatic. Like, really not dramatic at all. Sometimes her eyes would glow, but she would just say a couple of sentences in a different voice that kind of seemed like it was a different person. And this threat from this evil spirit was only to Mrs. Pearson, the wife of the Ratman, not to anyone else. She wasn't violent to anyone else when she was possessed. She wasn't throwing things around or hurting anyone. Sometimes shouted or maybe kind of shrieked, but nothing super dramatic. And I did kind of think, why is this so understated? But the more that I thought about this book came out in 1967. The Exorcist film was at the beginning of the 70s. I haven't seen it, but I am sure that everything that I have been exposed to, like films, any kind of TV, anything where there's demonic possession, is all influenced by The Exorcist. So maybe before that film, demonic possession was seen as something a little bit less dramatic. And it does make sense, because in this, at some point when Mrs. Pearson is possessed by the evil spirit, it says that the spirit kind of awkwardly turns her head because the spirit's not used to having a body, so it doesn't really know how to like work it. Whereas in The Exorcist and everything since then, it's more kind of levitating and spinning your head around. Which in a way doesn't make sense, because if there's an evil spirit possessing your body and it's working out like how to walk and things because it's not used to having a body, how can it do things that bodies can't do? Why can it do more tricks? Obviously it's fictional, but it kind of makes sense that it would be something more like this. With that said, it's not scary at all, because the only threat is to Mrs. Pearson. And even the fight between the evil spirit and Mrs. Pearson's spirit is kind of an internal thing, so it's not really visible that much from the outside. Or her eyes glow, I think. But they do feel kind of forces, but no one suggests that anyone's really in danger from this apart from Mrs. Pearson. Most of the threats in the novel aren't anything to do with demonic possession. There are things like poverty. Gladys and Annie, who are the sisters that live there, don't have any money. Gladys is a cleaner. Annie can't work. She's also mostly bedridden. And Gladys kind of cooks with scraps, and she'll buy the cheapest thing, but she's a really good cook, so she can make the most out of everything. But they really don't have much money at all, which is why they're so scared about the rent being put up. Gladys and Annie do have electricity and gas, but they have to put money in the meter, and sometimes it runs out. They don't always have money to get it. There's one time that the gas goes out when they have a visitor, and it says, Annie considered apologising for the behaviour of the gas and decided against it. Keep your poverty to yourself. And also the feeling of not having power, because all the power is in the hands of the Ratman, who has the money and can just tell them what to do, and they can't really do anything against it. And even a couple of times people mention, oh, but there's laws to protect you, and they're like, but he doesn't care about the law. It rings very true, even thinking about my experiences in London with a landlord who, you know, the central heating went, the hot water went, and he just refused to fix it. And we were contacting everyone, like, what can we do? Can we stop paying our rent? And they were like, no, you can't stop paying your rent, because then you'll get a CCJ. But he didn't fix this for like 3 weeks or something. It was crazy. Yes, there are rules, but if the landlord doesn't follow the rules, what can you do? Not really anything. Whereas if the tenant doesn't follow the rules or doesn't do what the landlord wants, then the landlord can throw them out, because they have the money, therefore they have the power. There was another quote that I liked just after Mr. Pearson, the Ratman, comes and visits for the first time and basically kind of lets them know who's boss, Annie and Gladys and Mr. Fisher. Gladys says, I'm glad I've seen them close too. They say they mostly never come near the places they buy, like murder is only the opposite. I liked that. I mean, Stella Gibbons is so good at seeing the reality of situations, but also bringing out the humour in even unpleasant situations. There's also a lot of racial tension in this book, just reflective of the time. So there's some racial stereotypes, especially the older generation. So Gladys and Annie and Mr. Fisher talking about not trusting foreigners. But it seems like there is actually quite a lot of integration socially. So Gladys happily works for a Cypriot family as a cleaner in the restaurant. There's a German housekeeper who Gladys wants to teach to cook. She's a refugee from Germany. Her parents are dead. She's been in loads of places where she was like beaten and treated really badly. And Gladys really wants to teach her to cook as well as her so that she can be a cook in a posh restaurant. That's Gladys's dream for her. And Alexandra and Nikki, actually it's unclear what happens to them. Alexandra and Nikki are two schoolboys who are part of a Jamaican family who live on the same street, and they come and visit Annie every day after school, and they really love them. And then they just disappear one day. So the building that they live in is also taken over by Mr. Pearson. So it's kind of suggested that he forced them out, or ripped them off, or sent them somewhere else. But we never find out. One thing that I found really interesting, being written and set in the 60s, is that there were certain elements of it that seemed old-fashioned and certain elements that seemed very modern. And I think that's just reflective of how the 60s were a turning point. But there's a lot of mention of the war, like I was talking about the war, people talk in this about their experiences in the war. There's a lot of talk about the Blitz and how some places in London haven't been rebuilt yet and things. There are some wealthy characters, kind of Downton Abbey, living in big houses who've inherited wealth, who are still trying to hang on to almost that Downton Abbey lifestyle. So they'll have servants and housekeepers and drivers, but even that is kind of disintegrating. So a character in this who's a very wealthy woman, her son suggests that she replaces the servant she has with foreign servants because you don't have to pay them as much and they don't take as many breaks. So there's a kind of penny pinching and also an attitude of it being okay to exploit foreign workers. But they're trying to cling on to that lifestyle that used to exist, that doesn't really exist anymore. And then there's other people talking about Arsenal and Emergency Ward 10 on the television and what they've been watching on TV. So parts of the novel feel like they're in the past, like very much in the past. But some things in the novel are very recognizable from today and just don't seem that different. So I found that really, really interesting. The other thing I really liked was, and this is just how good Stella Gibbons is at writing characters, I really liked that even the bad characters are quite human. So there were a lot of times in this book where I would meet a character and think they're dreadful, they're just awful. And then later they would do something where I'd think, oh, okay, I kind of got them a bit wrong, and they're not fully bad. So everyone's kind of multi-dimensional. So for example, the curate, Gerald, I think he's 23, he's in his 20s, and he's kind of in training with the vicar and lives at the vicarage with him. And when Gladys first finds out that where she's living is being sold and she's really worried about it, she goes to see the vicar. The vicar isn't in, so she ends up talking to the curate and tells him her problems. And his internal dialogue is about how much he hates her. He says, God forgive him, he hated her kind and hair. And I was thinking, wow, this man is such a snob, he's just awful. She's come to him for help and he's just got this kind of revulsion towards her, and it's really unkind. And why is he training to be a vicar when he doesn't like people and he's really mean? But then by the end I really liked him actually. He's an interesting character. He loves theology. He loves reading about obscure saints. He's reading about a woman in Peru, an English woman in Peru, and her biographer who is petitioning to make this woman a saint. And there's a line where it says, Gerald had been playing with the idea of writing a joint biography of this forgotten pair, in the style of Lytton Strachey, with hardly any adjectives and occasional tiny dry etchings of the Peruvian and Victorian English scenes. What fun it would be. He just doesn't like people in real life situations, but he's actually a really kind man. And the same really for all the characters. They surprise you. Even when they're not very good characters, there's always something human about them. And it's a real talent of Stella Gibbons to be able to do that. and to make them all very human. They have flaws and they have faults, and some of them are deliberately unkind and deliberately do bad things, but she doesn't seem to write anyone off. So that was another part. A paper just blew and it was the wind, but I thought a poltergeist had moved it. I was like, oh, it's because I've been talking about possession and now demons are coming. I don't think that's how it works. Hopefully that's not how it works. Anyway, I really like this book. It's not scary at all, but worth a read, I would say. And that is my verdict on Starlight. So thank you for watching, and let me know if you've read it and if you have any thoughts. And I will see you next time. Bye.